Hello and welcome back to LAN 6340 3D Rendering with View, class number 2. As promised, we're going to be working with terrains today, both standard terrains and procedural terrains. We'll be looking at the tools that you can use to sculpt mountains and generate them using the Rocky Mountain fractal. Anyway, we'll get right into it. I'm just going to talk quickly about a little folder of materials that I've supplied for this. If you can just copy that from Moodle onto your hard drive, just so you've got this folder, class 2 materials somewhere. We're going to connect that up later on. I would probably recommend actually that you create a new folder, perhaps in your documents folder, called my viewlib, and then put class 2 materials into there, or have a viewlib materials, class 2 materials, something like that. Alright, we'll talk about that again soon. Okay, so here we go. Two types of terrains, a standard terrain and a procedural terrain. So we're going to talk a lot about these standard and procedural terrains. This also shows that you can load a procedural terrain preset as well, which just gives you a nice little way of creating something from scratch. Something from predefined terrain. However, we're not going to do that. We're just going to go standard terrain. Boom. Okay, we're just going to move this out a little bit, and let's just talk about this standard terrain. Let's just move this camera up a little bit so we can kind of see it a bit clearer. Alright, so there's our standard terrain. It's got no material on it at the moment, so it's a little bit boring. So let's go and assign a material to it. I'm just going to go into the materials, so I've got the terrain selected, right click on our materials, and we're going to go load a material. Sorry, ignore this. Load a material. So what we want to do is we want to add our class 2 materials, which in my case is sitting on my desktop. So I'd go desktop, class 2 materials, open. Cool. It's going to ask for a name. We're going to call that class 2 materials. And now it's in our little library. Okay. So what I'd recommend is that you have my viewlib, and in there my materials or something like that, and just load that one folder, so it will end up with one folder, and then it'll have everything in that folder underneath, and you can quite easily add to it in the future. Alright, so we're going to use this snowy mountain texture that I've prepared. Alright, so it looks a little bit like that. There's not this kind of needs some really steep features for the rocks to be shown. Sorry, I'm just going to right click up here on the camera, render final quality, render to screen, and 800 by 450 render. Okay, so we can kind of see this is our standard terrain. We've got a few little rocky outcrops sticking out, and that's about it. Alright, let's have a look at this tool. What can we do with it? For one, let's make it bigger. Okay, so quite simple. We're just going to go into the properties of this terrain, and here we've got the sizing for it. And we're going to change this to 4 kilometers. No, we'll go 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers. Oops, by 1 kilometer. Alright, so a bit more of a mountain now. Alright, and let's just look up there a bit. Okay, let me just drop this down a little bit. It's a bit hard to actually appreciate any of the size of that mountain when you go up so high. Alright, let's double click on this mountain. So you can either double click it in any of these views, or double click the name of it in our layers palette there. Now, by using your right mouse button, you can rotate this around. You can use your zoom, your scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and somehow, if I can remember how, you can pan this. I can't remember how. I thought you could. can with the 3D mouse. There we go. So you hold down the shift and right click, and you can kind of move this around a bit more. Okay, generally you'll find you just use the right mouse button and the zoom. Okay, so shift, right click. There we go. But yeah, if you've got a 3D mouse, for some reason the 3D mouse works beautifully in the terrain editor, and yeah, I couldn't be any happier. Alright. So, we've got a whole bunch of buttons up the top here. We're going to talk about some of these. A whole bunch of buttons down the left hand side. We're going to talk about those. And we've got a few brushes and effects that we can do. So we're going to talk about a lot today. Alright, let's start off nice and simple. First of all, there's two types of sculpting in here. 2D sculpting and 3D sculpting. 3D sculpting is dangerous, shall we say. Basically what happens is that we'll actually see, sorry, let's just turn that invert off. We can actually pull this out and manipulate it and do all sorts of crazy stuff to the terrain. However, you can kind of see it's all looking weird and wonderful. It adds a massive amount of polygons to the model. It's very difficult to control, and most of the time it looks quite unrealistic. So I would definitely avoid doing 3D sculpting if you can. If you are going to do it on a really small scale, but the 3D sculpting, yeah, not the coolest. So let's just hit 2D, and we'll see it'll actually remove all the 3D painting operations, and you'll actually see it just goes back to how it used to look. So I would highly recommend that you just use 2D sculpting. By all means, you can have a play around with it, and once you get good at using the 2D, then you can start venturing into doing 3D sculpting of your terrains. But yeah, big warning on how long it takes. So here we've got rays. Now you can see that it's going to brush. We can also paint in effects, although we've got a procedural terrain, so we don't want to do that. And we'll probably talk about that more when we talk about advanced texturing. So by default, if I hit raise, I'm going to raise this terrain, and I've got a few ways of controlling it. I can control the size. Okay, so I can bring up just a very small piece or a very large. Okay, so this is quite nice when you want to get like a little bit more of a peak on your mountains. You can just kind of really lift it all up. Very handy. The flow is how fast this operation works. So you'll notice now when I click, very quick. If you go right down to the other end of the scale, I'm clicking and not much is happening. We'll just increase that a little bit. Okay, so I usually like it around 0.2 sort of area, and usually it's manageable. Alright, we've also got fall off, and the fall off is to do with how steep the sides of my brush are. Okay, so you can see that's very steep sided. When the fall off is on 0, it's more like a mound. Alright, so we can raise. If we want to invert this, we can do that too, so that we're creating holes. And we can also, what else can we do? That's airbrush effect. You notice that this is now just instant. Okay, so I don't know why you want that, but airbrush is nice. It's kind of like as if you were spraying this effect on. Alright, so that's raise. Flatten is quite nice. It will actually flatten off a surface. If we wanted to flatten off the top of this hill, we could do that. I'll just increase my flow here a bit. Okay, and that's going to try and get the same level on it. Okay, so you can see it's really flattened it off. So if I did that in here, I'm going to increase my flow right up, and also put there we go. So it's flattening off those surfaces. Okay, so we can kind of get like a smoothing, flattened off effect. The altitude is very handy. What you do is you can actually set the altitude manually, or you can use this little eyedropper. So let's say I'll click on that yellow line there. So now I can just go in and paint that altitude in. So really good for making plateaus and level areas. Alright, just gonna carve into this a little bit. Okay, and when we're done with that, we can hit OK, and we'll see in here our beautiful rocky terrain, rocky snowy terrain forming. Okay. Bizarre? Yes. Edit this again. So yeah, I nearly always use that raise and altitude. Those two are by far the most useful. Smooth is good if you just want to smooth out an area. So it's quite good when you've got like a sort of a very rocky terrain and you want to smooth out the beach. You can run that over it, but it is a bit slow. As you can see, slowing the whole thing right down. You've also got effects in here which will add all sorts of extra detail. So you'll probably find alluvial and fluvial erosion. Looks really cool, and it'll actually kind of erode. You can kind of see it slowly working. If you just keep your mouse down on it, you can see fluvial, so it's going to start gouging, like as if water is flowing down the surface and moving sediment around. Okay, and alluvial, you can actually see that sediment building up in places. Pretty cool. We can say, well, if you want more of an effect, you go soft, okay, and we'll get much softer erosion, like as if it was sand that was eroding. When it's set to hard, you'll notice that you get really sharp cracks are forming in it, so especially with the fluvial, we'll get very thin, sharp cracks. And you can see these forming now. And we can also add a bit of grit. Okay, so you can see that's had a huge effect over here. We can also go undo. If you right click on these, you'll actually see that it's got usually some iteration count. So that did 10 iterations. So an iteration is like it's running through the math, this time 4 times. Okay. So, which is quite handy, especially when you want to do these fluvial. Sometimes you want to do heaps of them. So if we said like, okay, we'll do it 20 times. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. And it's actually going to go through doing fluvial erosion, and more erosion, then more erosion, then more erosion. So it's going through the maths multiple times. In this case, 20 times. Okay, and so there's our nicely eroded terrain. Getting some strange effects happening there. I've never seen it do that before. How bizarre. Okay, so let's do some fluvial. So I should break it up a little bit. Just right click on that. Yeah. 20 fluvial operations. There's also this river valley, which is a lovely button to press. However, it comes with a big warning in that it takes forever. Alright, that's looking pretty cool. So let's click that. Actually, I'm just going to change this to a much softer terrain. Now it's going through and you'll actually see down the bottom corner here, it's generating the terrain. It has usually quite a nice realistic looking effect. Possibly too soft. There's a few other things in here. We can do plateaus and that sort of carry on. Now there's another way of doing this, is that we can auto-magically create mountains using these tools on the left hand side here. So what we can do, if we just, these first ones are for resetting. So if we reset this terrain, it ends up dead flat. Alright, now we can go through and we can say, okay, let's create a mountain, and it will auto-magically create a fractal based mountain. It's pretty simple, but you get the general idea. And if I'm just going to reset these and just do them one by one. So this one here should produce something with a lot more ridges in it. Pretty cool. The reason I'm resetting is otherwise you get the effects doubling up on each other. What is that one called? Don't know. But a very eroded mountain. We've got plateaus. So actually we just do that from scratch. Looks like that. I'm just going to skip through some of these. You guys can play with it. Dunes is quite cool. Oops, hang on, let's just reset that first. Dunes. There we go. See, it looks like a sand dune. A little bit of rock. Don't know why, but my material's going transparent in there. Just a bit weird. Only seems to be doing it while I'm editing. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, and we can also load an image. Now I'm going to do a session on this in the future, where we can take an existing height map and load that in. So a height map being, which is effectively actually what this is. In fact, if I'm going to see this little coloured bar down the right, down the bottom here, sorry. If we go to load a colour map, I'm just going to make this black to white. Oops. Edit colour map. Edit. Load. Do it from there as well. Okay. This is effectively a colour map. So, and you can get these from all sorts of places. Usually, for terrain models. Why can't I move? Hello. My 3D mouse is working. So black being the lowest value, white being the highest. These are really handy because we can basically create a height map from GIS software, or sometimes you can actually just download them from certain sites for an area, and we can bring that in, and all we need to do is basically put in the not the position, but the size of it, so that we'd have a mountain that was might be 3 kilometers wide by 12 kilometers wide, and the highest, or the biggest difference in height was 5 kilometers, which would be kind of weird, but yeah. Okay, and so then you would produce a mountain in here that was quite realistic. Well, yeah, I wouldn't say realistic, but it's based on fact. All right. However, we aren't interested in this, so let's just, for some reason, I seem to. Okay, I just cancelled that, and everything's working again. Let's just load in a colour map again. You'll actually see it's got terrain editor maps. I quite like this one. However, these ones here have more variations going up the mountains. This one's quite cool though, because you kind of get like, it's nice big colour gradation, so it's quite clear. All right. Is that all I need to do? What's this one? Fractal terrain options. Interesting. You can just randomize it. You just put a number in here and it will give you a random terrain. There we go. Alright. So that's a standard terrain. So as I was saying, it's made up of a grid, in this case 256 by 256 grid of heights. In fact, we can increase that if we want more detail. So let's do that. That's 1024. We're going to generate a brand new mountain. Okay, and you can see we've got a lot more detail in there. Got a lot more detail happening in here. It definitely starts to slow down render time, so you don't want to have a 1024 by 1024 mountain that's way off in the distance and you can't see any of the detail anyway. So, be a little bit smart about it. Alright, so that's the standard terrain. Now, the advantages of standard terrain is they're relatively fast. They don't take any processing before it renders. However, there is a problem with detail. So let's we'll just run I'll run this river valley script over it, and or effect over it, sorry, and we'll see it kind of erode our terrain appropriately. You can see it's a lot slower now that I've increased it to 1024 by 1024. Alright, so yes, I had to kind of force quit the application because that river valley was just taking way too long. So I'm just going to stick with this. Alright, so that's most of the, I think that's pretty much all the controls for the standard terrain. A few little things to help you out. You can hit this little button here and you should be able to see it with the materials on it, although in this case, because the material is quite complex, it doesn't look very impressive. We can also show other objects that are in the scene, which can be very handy if you're trying to sculpt around a building. Unfortunately, we don't have any other objects in here, so it's not going to do anything. We've got a quick way of getting a sort of a top-down view. Let's turn that back to. That's a bit odd. How come I reset color map? Load color map. Okay. No, it's not going to show me, is it? Ah, that's because I've got the material painter on. There we go. Right, is there anything else? So I can copy and paste and undo, zoom in, zoom out, etc., etc. We can equalize the scene, which basically should balance everything out height-wise. We can invert it. We can filter altitudes. I don't know if I really want to go here, but basically what you can do is, if we go and load a filter, we could let's say we don't do an inverse terrain profile. So we go. See, so if we wanted to get something that looked like a volcano, go okay. It should push down the center of our hill. Well, it hasn't got a huge effect because I didn't really have a flat hill to begin with. So he's kind of doing some strange things to the tops of my hill. Cancel that. So before we leave here, though, I was going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of standard terrains versus procedural terrains. And one of those big differences is the quality of it when you get up close. So I'm just going to grab another camera here. Just going to move that right up close to one of these peaks. And flick over to the other camera. Okay, I could do it from there, I could do it from here as well. Just drop this right down. Okay, so now this is a very detailed standard terrain, because remember we had it set to 1024 by 1024. However, you'll notice that when we get in quite close, it's actually not looking too bad, but you can see it doesn't look very natural. And in fact, if we get any closer to this, we're just going to start seeing strange pointy peaks and other oddities. Okay, it starts to lose a lot of its realism, and you actually see even in this model. So, enter the procedural terrain. In fact, I'm just going to move this mountain. Let's pop that over there. Create a new procedural terrain, which is this little mountain with an F attached to it. And again, we're going to go 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers by 1 kilometer. Alright, now first up you'll notice there is a bit of a difference here. We have a mountain with a crazy amount of detail, but what we have, and we select this camera, if we zoom in here, you can see the little triangles around the camera are smaller than ones further away. And so this terrain is a mathematical model. So rather than having a whole bunch of pixels, if you like, determining what the heights are, this is actually using a mathematical model to determine what the surface is going to look like. And by default, it's just what do you call it? A simple fractal. Okay, so it just looks a little bit noisy, really. But look at the huge amount of detail that we're seeing. Okay, remember when we went and looked at this other one? Okay, you can see these like little pointy bits. It's like as if it's just being pinched and pulled with a pair of tweezers. Now we can see there's just like this fine detail, and it doesn't matter how close we get, we'll just see even more detail. And if I go and load our material, okay, and I hit render now, we'll see now it looks just fantastic. Alright, now this is just using a really simple terrain. Okay, so this is just a very unintelligent, noisy fractal. But look at the amount of detail, it's just nuts. Okay, let's double click on this. Now you'll actually notice in here that everything looks pretty much the same, and we can do the same things. We can raise things and alter it and do all sorts of bits and pieces. Okay, so what's actually happening is there's two things happening. We've actually got the procedure, which you can actually see here, it says proc. There's the procedure that's creating our heights, and we've got our brush effects, and in fact you can reset the 2D sculpting, all this, the material painting. But we haven't done any material painting, but we can reset the 2D. See, so it's almost like as if it was an override. It's sort of saying, okay, well here's the surface plus raise that bit. Okay, and so we can actually reset that. And we've got another thing here called zones, which I don't know if it's a way of breaking down our terrain into small manageable pieces, if you like. So if you had your building here, you could actually break that down, and then you can deal with just that in one individual piece. But yeah, I don't know if we'll talk about that today. So let's go to this procedure. I'm going to right click on this and go edit function. Now here we can see we've got a simple fractal. Okay, it's actually a Perlian noise fractal, and it looks just like noise, like clouds almost. We've got a couple other little plugins. So the way that this works, and we're going to see this with the material editor as well, and in fact you can use it for doing animation and all sorts of crazy stuff. But yeah, we're obviously using it for the terrain. And so what's happening is that we're just taking a position in the world, and it's mapping an image, in this case this fractal, onto the surface. We've got a couple extra little nodes in here that we don't need. Okay, so you can imagine this is the sort of the position being fed into here, and it's actually getting randomized. It's just basically just pushing this around so that you get a different output every time you create a terrain. If I change this, you'll see that my terrain is actually changing in here in a kind of the weirdest way. If I click on here now, I'll get a slightly different mountain. So we're not interested in that, we're going to delete it. This here is a multiplier. For some reason it creates this as well, and what it's doing is it's just basically giving us a vertical exaggeration. And you'll see that if I go and reduce this right down, you'll see that mountain changes. It's actually exaggerating in all. I don't like it. I'm going to get rid of it. And when I do so, it means that I'm now just using this fractal. Okay, and in this case, it's oversimplified. The reason for that is this largest feature. If I drop that down to about 1.1, we should get a bit more. Oh, and I need a bit of roughness in here, and I'll start seeing something that we kind of saw before. However, I don't want to use this fractal anyway. This fractal's a bit boring. What I want to use is, you see there's all sorts of fractals in here, is the Rocky Mountain. In fact, let's just talk about some of these because there's some really cool stuff in here. Let's look at this simple fractal even. You can see that we've got all sorts of different types of simple fractals. And some of these, you could use just for making different patterns with, if you like. So there's an onion fractal. Now this is actually, there's another thing happening on top of this. See this guy over here? It's this little orange button. What it's doing is it's zeroing the edges. So if I uncheck that, you'll actually see really what this fractal looks like. Okay. So you can already see, ooh, a water splash. Yeah, and you should be able to actually, change this, and we can actually see it changing over here. Cool. So we can animate. Remember, when we do animation, you can animate anything that's numerical. So we could actually create like a splash effect. Yeah. If we did all these at the same time, it would be a lot more sensible. Let's put that back to 4.5. All right. So what I wanted to show you though is the Rocky Mountain and the Eroded Rocky Mountains, but we'll start off with the Rocky Mountain. So if I click over here again, you'll see that, okay, a little bit boring. So we've just got to change a few things in here. First thing I want to change is this largest feature. I'm going to drop that right down, about 1.7. Cool, excellent. and we're going to increase this gain to about, let's just go 10, let's just go extreme, see what happens. Alright, now we're getting something looking a little bit more interesting. Now you can see actually at the moment what it's going to do is it's going to produce lots and lots and lots and lots of mountains. And in fact, if we just increase the size of this terrain, which we can actually do with this very cool little feature over here, we can say, let's make it 6 kilometers. It's a little bit different to stretching it, because if you stretch it, it just, yeah, just makes everything a bit bigger. So this will actually give us more canvas. Would you like to create a new zone? That was what I was talking about before. No, we don't. Just want to see the whole thing. Did it create a new zone? No, it didn't. But wait, it's still got the orange thing happening on there. And I can't. What's going on? Oops. Hang on, let's just move our camera. So what's happening here? Just drop that on the ground. Grab my camera. Where are you? Oh, I see. You're just staring straight at a cliff face. Let's move him out there and lift him up a bit. I think my gain's probably a bit high. Okay, and so we've kind of got like this little valley happening in here. Alright, looking pretty spectacular already though. And let's just see what our heights ended up at. Yeah, so we've ended up 4 kilometers high, which isn't that cool. So let's go into this procedural terrain again. Here we go. Edit function. So let's just drop that gain down a bit. Drop it down to 6. If we go and flick into here, we should see it. Yeah, that's a bit better. Now the next thing is when it's set to separate mountains, it's going to produce lots and lots of separate mountains. If we switch that off though, we should get just one big mountain. There we go. And I'm going to turn that 0 edges back on again so that it kind of forces it back into a single mountain. Alright, now we can actually, let's just have a little talk about how this fractal works. You've got to remember that mountains are formed by millions of years of erosion and uplift and you know, wind and ice and water and, you know, fluvial and alluvial erosion. And what Eon's managed to do is kind of replicate all these using a mathematical model. Okay, and you can actually see this mountain's actually looking pretty cool. Let's just increase this gain just a little bit. Okay. So and if we can move this around and stuff, so I usually you just grab the wavelength and move it, you should get a totally different effect. Oh, sorry, not the wavelength, the origin. So I usually just throw a random number in here and you'll just get a new mountain. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, that's interesting. What we're actually doing is we're moving the fractal around. Okay. So that's looking, hey, that's looking kind of cool. It's kind of got this weird sort of peak happening. That's quite bizarre. Alright, let's go with that. So in theory, if you put the same numbers in here, you should end up with exactly the same mountain. Okay, let's just have a look at this. See this overall aspect. We've got actually, well, there's a couple of other things I'll talk about first. The base roughness, so note that's on 0.45. If we go down, you'll see that this ends up simplifying and we lose a lot of detail and we end up with almost like a pyramid in this case, but more sand dune like. Okay, increase the roughness, so let's go the other extreme and you'll see a lot bigger extremes in here. Okay, so obviously that 0.45 was looking pretty cool. Let's go 0.5, see what that looks like. So we might end up with just slightly bigger hills in here. There we go. That's looking kind of interesting. Okay, Now, if we go to the iterations, I'm going to change this to 2 iterations. This is going to show us it in its most simple form. And this kind of shows off how the math works. So what's happening is it's going through and doing an iteration. It's going through its mathematical model once. And you can see what it's done is it's kind of forming ridge lines. Okay? You go to iteration 3. Okay, we just click on this window again. Okay, and you can see it's taken all of what was done in iteration 2, and then it's kind of like if it's running through it again and adding more ridge lines and more detail and more noise or roughness. Okay, so sometimes you might be like, well, actually, I'm trying to do maybe an iceberg or something, and that's the kind of look that I want. Okay, and if we'll go right down to 7 iterations. Alright, and we've got a lot more detail happening, so that's all pretty cool. So let's just have a look at that. Let's go OK, and OK over here as well. Alright, my mountain buried a little bit. Let's go drop. And let's grab this camera that's way up in the air now. Yeah. Drop it right down here. Actually, I kind of like the look of it from this angle, I think. Alright. Click on this little window here if it doesn't auto update. It should render. So the advantage of the standard terrain is it's a lot quicker. This doesn't want to update for some reason. Doesn't matter. Let's just do another render. So you usually find that it spends a little bit of time preparing before it starts to do the render. And you can actually see down the bottom here it says building procedural terrain. So it's basically going through and then adding and removing detail wherever it's needed. And here is our first procedural mountain. Now, you can see that there's a huge difference in the detail. Okay, and we're looking pretty realistic. We've got some really nice sort of ridges and rocks sticking out. Alright. Okay, so there's our standard terrain. Meh. Up close. Meh. And here is our brand new Rocky Mountain terrain. Okay, it looks pretty fantastic. Alright, let's just cancel that. Close that, I should say. And let's have a little look, because it's capable of even more. If we go to this procedure again, actually I'm going to show you something. Oh, that's interesting. Why has it gone and added those to it? A bit weird. I don't like those. Usually it does that if you can. Have we changed anything? No. Don't know why I did that. Okay. I'm just going to back this off to about 5 iterations just to speed things up. Let's have a look at these rocks here, okay? And in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop this right down to 2 iterations just so you can really clearly see what's happening here. And we're going to go add rocks at iteration number 2. I think it's only doing 2 iterations. And we'll just click over here and we'll see it's adding rocks. Okay, so if I switch that off, that's what it looks like without and with. Okay, and you can actually see how it's fitting these rocks onto the terrain. What you'll find is that if you do it at iteration 2, you end up with big groups of rocks. If you do it like, so let's say we do 5 iterations, right? Let's just show that. Okay, so it's doing 5 iterations for the mountain, but it's adding the rocks at iteration 2. And so usually they're not very intelligently placed. Whereas if we go and change this to iteration 5, you'll see that we get smaller clumps of rocks. Well, I'm hoping we do. There we go. And they're a little bit more associated to how the hill was looking in the first place. That's strange. We've got one big rock on the top of my hill there. kind of cool. Let's just back this off a little bit. Let's just back the height off a little bit, make it a little less rough. Alright, that's it, done. Okay, let's go OK to that, and OK. And we'll render one from this angle just so you can see what's changed. I've actually changed two things. So I went from 7 iterations on the Rocky Mountain terrain to 5. Plus I've added rocks. Alright, apart from the odd strange little artifact. See, probably that's from going from 7 to 5 actually, and you can kind of see how we've lost a little bit of detail. However, you can see there's rocks and stuff scattered around on the surface here. And in fact, I might change that back to 7 iterations. It was looking a lot better, wasn't it? It's not that. Where are we? Edit object. That's a bit weird. Let's just double click it. Edit the function. Let's go in here and just change it back to 7 iterations, even if it does cost us a little bit of time. It just looked a lot better, didn't it? Alright, that's finished. Okay. Should be interesting just to see what the difference in render times are actually. So again, see it's doing that preparing, building procedural terrain. So you can definitely see it's a little bit slower, but the payoff is just phenomenal. Look at that extra detail, it's awesome. Okay, so we're getting a very realistic looking mountain. Now I'm going to pop the camera down here so we can see some of these rocks. So that's 7 iterations with rocks being added at iteration 5. We've got some really cool sort of smoothed areas. I could tweak my texture to yes, at the moment it's the snow's appearing on flat areas and the rocks appearing on steep areas. So let's just go and grab that other camera that I've got floating around here somewhere. There it is. And I want to go and drop it down close to, especially near that flat area, just so. I spotted it over here, it's looking quite good. Pop it there. If I just go Shift D, it will drop my camera on the ground. Once it figures out where the ground is. Right, I'm actually 12 meters up in the air. Getting a little bit unresponsive here. Actually, we'll just pull that over here a bit and then I can look at that mountain. Come on. I think I've got my... Alright, I think that should probably do the trick. Let's hit render on that. Again, so it's preparing, building procedural terrain. And still going. Actually, while I'm here, can I? No, I can't. Oh, I can if I hover. So that last render was 55 seconds versus 28. So you can see it actually, more than doubled our rendering time. Well, about double our rendering time just from adding those rocks and the extra iterations. Oh, that was just the extra iterations, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, but it's looking pretty awesome. So you can see, I mean, trying to sculpt this amount of detail using the mouse and other controls would just not be achievable. Alright. Of course, we could create an ecosystem with rocks. I know I haven't talked about ecosystems yet, but it's a way of placing objects onto, or as a material onto things. So it'd be like your trees and rocks and any other objects. However, doing it procedurally like this, you end up with a huge amount of detail, and it looks really spectacular. Okay, so you can actually see there's those rocks being dropped in there, maybe in the foreground a little bit as well. But yeah, it's looking pretty cool. Alright. The other terrain that I'd put in there, texture was for sand, and so you might want to try that after you finish watching this, is tweaking that Rocky Mountain terrain until it looks like sand dunes, and then try using that other material that I've given you for class 2. Alright. How long have we been going? Almost an hour. Let's just do a couple other little things here. Let's change this to the Eroded Rocky Mountain terrain. I can't remember when that one showed up. And we'll put some similar settings into it. I'm hoping that I can just actually swap it out. So I go Rocky Mountain and change it to Eroded Rocky Mountain, hopefully. No, it resets everything, which kind of sucks. Actually, I'm just going to cancel that, and I should get my mountain back. Right, there we go. Edit the function, because I might actually just go over to the side here, and we're going to go add fractal Eroded Rocky Mountain. Because to be honest, I haven't actually tried doing this, putting exactly the same settings in and seeing what the differences are. So let's say 1.7. Alright. 455, 44. I'm also going to give you a really cool tip. What was my gain? 7.27. I know some of these numbers aren't bang on. I've got 0.5 on my base roughness. They should start to look kind of the same. 0.7. Alright, and we want rocks at iteration 5, and that's going to be 0.42 and 0.06. And what did I say? 0.06. What else we got going on here? We've got 7 iterations. Oh, actually, one thing I haven't talked about is the ground level. The ground level, so that should be 2.5, actually is the base level of the mountain. And so if you lift that up, 0.55, you'll actually see our mountain gets kind of eroded away, almost like as if the ground, was higher. There you go. So you go 0, you'll see that the mountain really just keeps going down. The only thing that's really going to stop it is zeroing the edges. Okay, but you end up with a lot more detail down in these areas. Alright, so let's just change that back to 0.1. And I'm just going to delete this now and wire this into here, and we should see that change from oh, I know what I haven't changed, separate mountains. Oh, that's completely different, isn't it? Have I missed something? Nope. Pretty much the same thing. But yeah, quite a different output. So let's go OK. And hit OK. So we should end up, so this is using the Eroded Rocky Mountain fractal, which is a newer fractal. And we'll hit render on that and just have a look at that and see what it's going to look like. Alright. So one thing you would have noticed is that our rendering time went from 1 minute 48 to 1 minute 46, so about the same amount of time to render, but the result is quite different. You can actually really see as if, you know, the sediments are being eroded and pushed down the hill. So it's kind of got this more softer effect in areas, which is pretty cool. Okay, I've got a couple extra little tips for you. One thing, which I could have done ages ago, I suppose, but I didn't. Actually, while I'm here, this mapping mode, object parametric, means it's going to map the object to the fractal to the terrain. Whereas if we set this to world parametric, I'm going to say yes to this. What happens, actually I should say no, is that if you imagine this fractal keeps going, it goes off for an infinite distance. And so what can be really handy, sorry, I'm just going to edit this function for a second, is, because I just added this just so I got the same effect. So instead of the fractal being mapped to the object, the fractal just keeps going on in an infinite direction. This should change actually. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to actually switch this off as well. Cool. So now what will happen, I should end up with just one big valley, if you like. Alright, I'm going to hit OK to this. We're going to have to zoom out. Now what's cool about it, let's pull this up because it looks like, if I go and option click and drag out a copy of it, if these things touch each other, they'll actually line up. Well, they should do. Yep. Okay, and so what's actually happening is that because this is a complete copy of this, and that fractal keeps going on forever and ever and ever, it's really quite a handy way of just placing extra meshes around to get a completely different shape, but the same mountains just continue over and over and over, which is pretty cool. It also means that if I go and stretch this mountain out, we shouldn't, although it is. Yep, it's thinking about it now. It should just continually increase the size of my mountain. Yeah. So it shouldn't stretch it. Okay, I have to think a bit about that. So if I just grab this camera and lift it up a bit, you can actually have infinite terrains that go on forever and ever and ever. Maybe we'll do that one day. My computer's slowing down because I've got 2 million polygons and I haven't limited the number of polygons, which your system probably is limited. But yeah, you can see in here how that little ridge keeps going through there. Hang on, I'll just pause this for a second. Oh no, because I have to restart the software. I don't want to do that. Oh, this is because, remember last week I was saying with that locked height thing? It's a pain in the bum. Alright. Come on. Get up there. Alright, and so we've got this seamless looking terrain. Alright. Anyway, have I got any other tips? Oh yes, I have got one last tip, which is very convenient. Actually, I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to change that back to being not so wide. Which does mean it's going to sit there and churn away a bit. Double click on our procedural terrain. Oops, what happened there? Edit. Now, one cool thing is like, yeah, you sit here and you're playing around with all your settings and everything, but if you notice, it was kind of annoying having to go over here, making changes, and going over here. However, one really cool thing is it takes a little while to set up, but see this thing on the side here? We can plug little drivers into to drive these variables, which I don't want to go there. However, if you go and right click on this, you can go publish parameter. I'm just going to call this mountain or something, doesn't really matter. Okay, and then you just go through and just right click on all these, publish, just press return if you want to speed things up, right click, publish, return, right click, publish, return, right click, publish. From second output, no, I can't do that anyway. Alright, so now you just go OK, and see here we've got published, and it's all, I didn't have to do it for every single variable, you could do it just for the ones that you want to be able to fiddle around with. I've done it for all of them, so now what I can do is I can flick over to publish, just make this a bit bigger, oopsies, there we go. And you can see all of those settings, and what's really cool is that I can now go, okay, well let's see what does this distortion thing do, and I can adjust it, and we'll see it distorting, hopefully, in real time on the left hand side. And of course the fell. Alright. You can get some really strange effects happening with this. In fact, let's just, we're just going to turn off the rocks. So no rocks, just to speed things in, and we'll just reduce this down to, say 4 iterations, just so we can kind of speed the whole process up. So let's go distortion again. You'll actually see it twisting and warping and moving this stuff around. In fact, it looks quite effective when you have the zeroed edges on it. Okay, so you can actually see it's distorting the math. So if we go extreme, it's really weird, warped and twisted mountain ranges and valleys and stuff. Okay, and likewise with the stretch factor, I'll warp it and twist it and do some weird, funky things to it. Actually, that's looking pretty cool. Got a little bit of this. And usually I find just having a little bit of this on, if you go a bit too extreme, it starts to produce just weird looking mountains. And see, it's kind of just stretching and distorting the whole thing. Cool. So that can be a bit of fun. Remember as well, if it's like, oh, that's almost what I want, but it's got a few funny features, just go through, change that origin, put a random number in there, and you'll get a different looking mountain based on the same rules. Okay, so remember what I'm doing is I'm actually moving this fractal around. Actually, I don't know what's going to happen if I move it in the Z. In theory I'm lifting it up, so nothing. But yeah, we just... Ooh. What was that one? Was that 11, was it? 11 looked good. Was it 1? It must have been 1. Yeah, look at that. Alright, we've got a great big volcano happening now. Cool. That looks awesome. Okay, let's bump that back up to 7. Let's put our rocks back on. Iteration 4 or iteration 5, doesn't really matter. Hit OK. Looks like something out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind now, doesn't it? We flattened off the top. Alright, it's being a lot more responsive as well. Alright. And that's a magnificent mountain. Maybe just move a bit closer. Not that close. Alright. Looking lovely. Have I talked about everything? I think so. Let's have a quick look in there again. Oh, I think there's a thing called fast shadows. You don't want to switch that off. It is a lot faster with fast shadows switched on. Sometimes they do get weird looking shadows, and so you have to change that. There is a quality boost in here as well, which also does make it look a lot better. However, it of course comes at a price. So yeah, if you want to do that, I'd recommend you save before you press go. And of course you can go through and edit this a little bit more and do basically what I would call an override. So if you just want to accentuate something, or you want a little bit more procedural, sorry, what do you call it? Actually you can't do it. Effects, doesn't have it. It's probably because it's procedural. But yeah, anyway, you can actually run these things over it again, and you should be able to reset it just by hitting that button. Okay, so well, that's not what I wanted. You can reset it. You should be able to. Come on, reset. Let's hit that flat then. Churn. It should go back to how it was. No. And let's just have a look what happened in here. Ah, it's got a, here we go. We'll reset that. So you can actually see it's just using this filter. So if we reset the filter, it should go back to how it was. There we go. And so yeah, let's say we did that volcano one, should work good now. So if we go load, volcano, hit OK. See, so basically what it's doing is it's going through, when it gets to its maximum value, then it starts pushing them in the opposite direction. So it should end up with a crater. Sometimes you need to fiddle it a bit though. Come on. Nope. It hasn't really worked. And the mountain's floating again. Let's go reset. Alright, I think that's about it. Anything else I need to talk about? No. Anyway, so yeah, I'd love to see some of your pictures. About the assignment, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to give you a model, or maybe a bunch of models, or the option to download them. So it'll probably be something quite architectural, and then you need to put it into a scene, and you're going to put some mountains in the background and that sort of carry on. But first we just got to get a little bit more of a base on your skill set up, and so yeah. But until then, please post whatever pictures that you have rendered out. Comment on other people's pictures. If you want to put them on your blog, that'd be cool, or you can post them straight into Moodle down below of this video here would be cool. And yeah, I think that's about it really. So next week we're going to be talking a lot about materials, and we'll create some materials like what I've created for you today. And yeah, that's about it really. So till next week, have some fun, and yeah, spend lots of time pushing and pulling some of these terrain fractals. Have a look at some of the other fractals if you want. See what you can do with them. There's all sorts of things in there. You probably would have seen on my blog. There's a picture of a big spiral cloud. I used the spiral fractal to dictate where the clouds were. So there's a lot you can do with them. You can see that real stretch and distort really having quite some effect on it. Getting some strange triangles forming in here though, unfortunately. But yeah, pretty spectacular stuff. But that's what that stretch and distort. So if you overdo it, it starts to look a bit weird. Alright, until later, this is Zane signing out, and see you next week.